All right, good evening, Whitman. And if you celebrate, Merry Christmas. If you celebrate, Happy Hanukkah. If you don't, it's Dickens, it's Scrooge, bah humbug. So tonight what I'd like to do is I'd like to, talk about, Dickens and his novella, A Christmas Carol. Now, a novella, Dickens wrote 15 or 20 novels, 15 of which, were over 800 pages. A novella is, well, there's two ways to look at a novella. By the way, there are folks off to my right and to my left, so just so you know, I'm not imagining people in the room. If a novella is either an expanded short story or it's a reduced novel, it's a small novel. A novella has a message. A novella is a parable. And this is the size of A Christmas Carol. Right here. Here we go. In this version, it's 88 pages. All right, this is A Christmas Carol. So you might be wondering, what's this? These are the 4 other Christmas books that Dickens wrote, hoping to hit pay dirt again the way he did with A Christmas Carol. He never did. This was a one-shot deal. He made a great deal of money. And the irony, of course, about making a great deal of money is that that's what he was critical of Scrooge. He was critical of Scrooge. He was just concerned about money, 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 a soulless, heartless guy. So what Dickens was looking to do, you say Dickens was very concerned about the plight of the poor, particularly poor children. I mean, London was a dangerous place. A London criminal, it stank. Open sewers, the slaughterhouses, the remnants, the bones, the remnants of pigs and sheep and goats and cattle were simply thrown in the street, thrown in the gutter, thrown in the Thames, thrown in tributaries of the Thames. The place stank. And for you and for me, many times, and maybe you have this at home, a nice Dickens table, and everything is bright and cheerful and clean. That was not the London that Dickens knew, that Dickens lived in. Well, not exactly in, but certainly walked 10 or 12 miles a day. I'll come back to this. He wrote this in 5 weeks, 6 weeks. He needed money. He had 10 children. He and Catherine Hogarth had 10 children. He needed money. Dickens was all about money, again, which is so ironic because Scrooge is all about money. Dickens lived high. Dickens lived a high life. He had 10 children. Christmas is coming in 1843, and we get a Christmas Carol. A little bit about Dickens's background. Dickens, he grew up poor. There was always a sense of the family on the run. His parents, his mother and father, spent every peso, wrong currency, every pence, every shilling that they made. They couldn't keep two shillings together, and they were always jumping the rent. And for Dickens, his childhood, we were always on the run. There was never any family cohesion. There was never any home and hearth and joy. And that governed him, the rest of his life. The child of 4 becomes the adult of 40. I mean, the child of 5 becomes the adult of 50. And you bring your childhood with you, and you carry that memory. I'll tell you who read Freud. Freud read Dickens. He particularly read David Copperfield, because in David Copperfield, this is the closest that Dickens ever gets to revealing his private life, his personal side, just how poor he was. Dickens always had a sense, as a youngster, of abandonment and victimization. And you see it in his writings. And Dickens was a very private man. Publicly, hail fellow, well met. Publicly, a funny guy, good-looking guy, dressed like a dandy, a great conversationalist. He had this cane, and he would walk with the cane. They would pop it, to make a point, or direct it at you to make a point. People liked Dickens, and he walked 5, 10, 12 miles a day through London. Now, why did he do that? to pick up the sights and the sounds and the smells and the activity of London. It was his canvas. And what Dickens will do, whether it's Bleak House, A Christmas Carol, Bleak House or Hard Times or A Tale of Two Cities, which, by the way, we've all read, I know that. Everyone that's a sophomore in high school has read A Tale of Two Cities. And you know why teachers assign The Tale of Two Cities? It's the shortest of his books. They all are over 800 pages. And depending on the deal he had with his contractor, with his publisher, and typically it was Chapman and Hall, that one got paid by the number of words. So there you have it. The number of words you can fill a page with, that's part of your paycheck. And there are other ways that he made money, serialization of the books and so forth. But he walked London. People liked him. He was approachable. And if you met Charles Dickens on the street, maybe you met him in a reading room. Maybe you met him in the restaurant. Perhaps you met him in the lobby of a hotel. And he was very approachable. And he took a snapshot of you. He had an incredible memory, he could mimic voices, and he would remember something about you. So you would show up, you in Whitman, England. You would show up in one of his novels, not by name, but maybe by what you wore, a gesture, the way you smiled, the way your teeth were misaligned, the way you wore a hat, the way you turned on your heel and walked away, the way you limped, whatever it might be. And you'd be in there somewhere. He was always looking for characteristics and always looking for names to people his novels with. And one place where he found names is that he would walk through graveyards and look at headstones. And by the way, back then, those graveyards really stank. London was filling up. The average lifespan for a child, maybe 14 or 15. The young boys worked the streets. Fagin, unrelieved terror working for Fagin, breaking into apartments, pickpocketing, stealing, whatever. Young girls, 11, 12, 13, a life of working the streets, young prostitutes, dead at 15, dead at 17. My point is that one always knew that you were close to a cemetery, maybe half a mile away. It stank. It's part of the stink of Dickens's London as opposed to a Dickens village. Why did it stink? I'm going to tell you why. They're running out of space in London for burials. And the grave diggers would keep a log somewhere, or maybe in a register, as to when this grave site had last been opened. Maybe a year ago, maybe 2 years ago. And they would open it up. And by then there was decomposition, putrefaction. I can't make this up. It's too rich. It's too horrible to make up. The grave diggers would stomp on the bodies, push them down, collapse, break the bones, push them down to make room for the next round of dead. And of course, the abdomens would explode, and all that foul stink would get into the air and get into the wind and come drifting down the streets. This is the London that Dickens knew. Dickens so concerned about young boys, young girls, that the future, the children are the future. Now, what about Dickens growing up here a little bit? He grew up very poor. As I said, his father, there was no family life. They were always jumping the rent. And unlike today, unless you're really in debt, that going to the poorhouse, is very common. Debtor's prison, debtor's prison. And his father always jumping the rent and never being able to pay a bill. And eventually the law caught up with him. And he went to debtor's prisons for 90 days, 120 days. Mother went with him. All the children, save Charles, went in a debtor's prison. So where did Charles go? At the age of 12, he's working. And he's working in a boot black factory. Stands on a stool. He has the workbench in front of him, staring into an alleyway, dark, dank, wet. He could hear voices, people passing, people cursing, rats scurrying about. And he worked 8 days a week, he worked 6 days a week, 12 hours a day at the table. And what he did, he had an empty bottle, and he filled it with shoe polish, black shoe polish, capped it, corked it, put a label on it, put it in a box, and when that box became filled with 24, the supervisor took it, and there's another box. And he went to work alone at dark in the morning, and he came home as well. And he lived in a small little closet, and an older woman, an older woman back then, 35, yeah, an older woman felt bad for him and gave him a place to live at, for very short money. Eventually his dad got out of prison. And the parents, his brothers, his children, he was always an ATM machine. Always, always, always. He resented it. And he went to school for a while and then got a job as a court reporter. And then as a reporter in Parliament, where he learned to listen and to observe characteristics and to develop his own shorthand so that he could very quickly make notes and expand those notes into an article or in his walks, expand what he saw, what he heard, into a novel. So where did you find Scrooge? A regulation, the Dickens character, walking in a cemetery, looking at headstones, looking at names. Ebenezer Scrooge. And I can use this. I know I can use this name. And can't you see him? Grabbing his notebook, he always had his notebook, and writing the name down. I can use this name somewhere. And that, for us, becomes such a name associated with Christmas, a Christmas carol. And it's Scrooge. We use it. We use it as a noun. We use it as a verb, don't we? You're a Scrooge. You spend money like a Scrooge, you're Scrooge-like. And Scrooge gives us bah humbug. And Dickens gives us Merry Christmas. The greeting typically had been Happy Christmas, Happy Christmas, Happy Birthday, Happy New Year, Happy Hanukkah, whatever. It was Happy Christmas. When Clement Moore wrote the night before Christmas, and he began to use Merry Christmas to copy Dickens, with Merry Christmas. So Dickens had been lecturing about the plight of the poor, the plight of poor children, the lack of home, the lack of friendship, the lack of family, home and hearth. And he was looking for a way to get that message out. You see, the poor were faceless. They were simply a category. And the British government, the poor laws, they had the deserving poor and the non-deserving poor. Now, I'm not quite sure how you distinguish between one and the other, but at least categorically, the deserving and the non-deserving, they were all poor. And they were just statistics, deaths, sickness, working in a factory, working in a coal mine, working in a textile mill. And the economists back then, David Ricardo and Malthus and Thomas Malthus, you might remember those names. It was called the dismal science. That's why economics at one time was called the dismal science. There will never be enough food to feed the population. There will always be more children than food. And the problem with the poor, as Scrooge would say, the problem with the poor is they have too many children. Excuse me, I'm going off camera. They have too many children. They need to be responsible. They need to be control themselves. Too many children, too many children. Deserving poor and the undeserving poor. And Malthus and Ricardo, that the food population, the food growth is relatively stagnant. In other words, it will only increase arithmetically. 1 ear of corn, 2 ears of corn, 3 ears of corn. Children, they exponentially, 2, 4, 6, 8. They'll always be the poor, they'll have more children. And the more children they have, they need more children to put in the mill, in the coal mine, in the textile factory to make ends meet. Dickens knew that. He grew up with that, and he wanted to send that message through a novella. By the way, if you're interested, Dickens was very cautious. There was the public Dickens, and there was the private Dickens. He hid how poor he had been. He was embarrassed. The only time he revealed it in an autobiographical way was in the novel David Copperfield. And it was his favorite novel because he was able to talk about himself under the pseudonym of David Copperfield. Hear me well. Dickens is playing tricks with you, with David Copperfield. David Copperfield, D.C. He's Charles Dickens, C.D. So that's a way that he was telegraphing to the reader, or those who knew, there's a little bit of me in David Copperfield. And as I said, you know, Freud read all of Dickens. And he read Dickens because he came to the realization through the talking cure, as I said, you are what you are by the time you're 5, 6, or 7. Those are the important years of formation of character, ego, and self-esteem. And Freud, the talking cure. Dickens was a national hero. He was a national treasure. Jane Austen, another national treasure. Shakespeare. You know, if everybody knows who you are by your last name, you know you've made it. Shakespeare, Dickens. Nobody has to explain to any American or any English-speaking person who Dickens was. And Mark Twain read Dickens. Now there's a man who was a national figure, a national treasure. I don't think there's any writer today in the country that everyone would know just by their last name. Like a Dickens, like a Twain, like a Shakespeare. And by the way, Charles Dickens, he always liked to introduce himself. He loved speaking, he loved reading, he loved lecturing. I introduced myself. You know, good evening, I'm Charles Dickens, as if people didn't know that. Mark Twain always introduced himself. Good evening, I'm Mark Twain, thank you for being with me. That's Twain. Everybody knew Mark Twain. And Mark Twain borrowed, stole, or however you want to phrase it, used the example that Dickens had offered, telling a story, Oliver Twist, David Copperfield, through the eyes of a child. You know, the vision, the perspective of a child. Mark Twain, we've all read either Tom Sawyer or Huckleberry Finn, through the eyes of a child. So Dickens, a national treasure. Everybody knew Dickens. And he was concerned about the poor, the plight of the poor. And he felt the best way to get this across was to write A Christmas Carol. He needed the money. Christmas was coming. He had 5 children. And he knocked it off in about 5 or 6 weeks. The original manuscript of this, Dickens, a novella, a parable, the original copy, the corrected copy, is in the J.P. Morgan Library in New York. And J.P. Morgan paid, in today's money, about $45,000 for the original manuscript. And it's beautiful. You go to the Morgan Library, and it's open. You know, the front piece is open. And Dickens wrote quickly. And he was a devoted editor. And you can look right at it, you can't touch it, it's under glass. But there's the script, the handwriting of Dickens, and then his lining out, blotting out words, and then running above it, a corrected, final, perfect copy. He did it in 6 weeks, and the deal he cut, in this instance, with his publisher, Chapman and Hall, I will pay for everything. What will you charge me to use paper, print, your press? I want to make a profit here. I'm not going to cut you in. It isn't that this is the way we're going to do it. I'm going to keep the money. And I want to get this out before Christmas. Beautifully illustrated. He paid for the illustrations. And the original copies came out. They were in a very thick velvet. One could feel it on the cover. The pages were gilt-edged, and they were beautifully illustrated. It hit the bookshelves December 17th, 1843. The word got out, it's Dickens, 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 you can trust Dickens. I mean, that's the way Twain sold his books. He would write a part of a chapter, and then the book agents would go out and say, this is the next book by Twain, buy it now, buy the first on your block. And you can get it in all different colors, leather-bound, paper-bound, whatever. Be the first. Get beautiful bookmarkers. And Dickens, it sold out in a matter of hours, 6,000 copies. He made a bundle, and it went through print after print after print. So let's get to it. Let's get to it. Let me read just bits and pieces, and I'll stop and I'll comment here. The book is organized not in chapters. It's organized in staves, 5 staves. You know the musical stave, like the dollar bill? It's because it's to be read aloud. It is a Christmas carol. It is a philosophy of sharing and giving, and that we are responsible to one another, particularly the children. The future is the children. And Dickens always feared social unrest. And that there is not enough private charity to handle the poor. And the government has to do more than simply provide internal order, defend the coastline, or make sure we all don't die of smallpox. There is responsibilities that government has to its population. It's a parable. It's a message. It's from the heart. And as we read through it, or maybe, I'm hopeful some of you in Whitman and whomever gets links to this will read A Christmas Carol. Dickens will be proud of you. And you can get it right here in the library. Don't have to pay a buck for it. 4 basic themes are intertwined through A Christmas Carol. It's sharing, empathy, charity, redemption. When I say redemption, I don't mean religious redemption. This is not about religion. This is about family, hearth, putting a face on the poor. The Cratchits, they're real people. The poor are real people. They're not numbers. They're not in that funeral wagon. Let me say it again. Sharing, empathy, charity, and redemption. Secular redemption. To understand we need to help one another out. And that there's no such thing as deserving and undeserving poor. There are the poor. And that's why I was reminded of that this afternoon, the Salvation Army, and out there with the kettle, and ringing the bell. And I thought of Dickens this morning, and I knew that I was, coming by this evening, so kind of connected with me again. So this is good. This is a message. I should be coming here tonight. Salvation, secular salvation, not religious salvation. A Christmas Carol is not about going to church. It's about home, hearth, family, food, and care. Dickens puts a face on the Cratchit family. They have nothing. They're poor. But they're rich in love, and they're rich in caring. That's the message. Now Dickens brings us in. This is a great opening. Great opening. And let me share it with you. Now Dickens is inviting you in here to read A Christmas Carol. And it begins, where else would you expect it to begin but at the beginning? Marley was dead to begin with. There's no doubt whatever about that. The register of his burial was signed by the clergyman, the clerk, the undertaker, and the chief mourner. Scrooge signed it. And Scrooge's name was good upon anything he chose to put his hand to. Old Marley was as dead as a doornail. Now, that would resonate with his readers. The term dead as a doornail comes from the 13th century. And I'm not talking about a three-penny nail. I'm talking about a spike. And there was so many break-ins. And if you were a man, a family of wealth, and you had a modest chateau, the entrance, the portico was very small, and with thick oak, and thick oak doors, all of which were held together by spikes. And when that carpenter pushed through that 4, 5, or 6 inch spike, bam, 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 he went to the other side of the frame, or the other side of the door, and the word was he clenched it, which means he banged it like that, so it could not be withdrawn. It made it more difficult to break in. Dead as a doornail. That nail can never be used again, unless it goes through a rolling mill. His readers would know that. The mention of Marley's funeral brings me back to the point I started from. There is no doubt that Marley was dead. This must be distinctly understood, or nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. Nothing wonderful can come of the story I'm going to relate. And then he gives us, Dickens, setting us up. He was a man of detail. Detail. This goes back to watching you. What are you wearing? You know, how are your teeth? How do you comb your hair? Do you have a flower behind your ear? Whatever. A man of detail. You know who read Dickens also for detail? Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. The, Holmes. You know, why did the dog not bark? The detail. Elementary, Watson. The dog knew the killer. Elementary. And you look at, I can't remember the name of the short story, but there's a wonderful Sherlock Holmes story where there's a murder, and Sherlock Holmes is able to find the murderer because he leaves a tip of an ash. He was smoking a cigar and was able to track down the type of cigar. It was the tobacco was rare, it was expensive. There were only so many shops in London that sold that cigar, and he backed it up from an ash to the killer. Detail, detail. He gives us Dickens. Oh, but he was tight-fisted at the grindstone, a squeezing, wrenching, grasping, scrapping, clutching, covetous old sinner, hard and sharp as flint, from which no steel had ever struck out generous fire, secret, self-contained, and solitary as an oyster. Isn't that great? As solitary as an oyster. Leave me alone. And it's Christmas Eve day, and Scrooge is in the office. He loans money, and working with him is Bob Cratchit, and it's dismal and dark. There's barely a fire going. The draft, your ankles are cold, your nose is cold, your ears are cold. Coal costs money. And Bob Cratchit is working at his desk, and he's watching the clock. Scrooge is watching the door, because every Christmas Eve day, his nephew, Fred, shows up to ask him once again to come to Christmas dinner with the family. He's watching the door, waiting for Fred to come in. I have to deal with that. He always asks, who's Fred? Fred's his nephew. Fred is the son of his sister deceased, Nan. And here's the exchange, and it sets everything up here. Suddenly, in the door, "A Merry Christmas, Uncle! God save you!" cried a cheerful voice. It was the voice of Scrooge's nephew, who came upon him so quickly that this was the first intimation he had of his approach. "Bah! Humbug!" "Christmas? A humbug, Uncle? Yes, you don't mean that, I am sure." "I do. Merry Christmas? What right have you to be merry, Fred? What reason have you to be merry? You're poor enough." "Come then," returned the nephew gaily, "what right have you to be so dismal? What reason have you to be so morose? You're rich enough. Don't be cross, Uncle." "What else can I be?" said Scrooge, "when I live in such a world of fools as this? Merry Christmas? Out upon Merry Christmas! What's Christmas time to you, Fred? But a time of paying bills without money? A time of finding yourself a year older and on an hour richer? A time for balancing your books? If I could work my will, every idiot who goes about with Merry Christmas on his lips should be boiled with his own pudding and buried with a stake of holly through his heart. He should." "Uncle! Uncle!" cried Fred. "Nephew! Keep Christmas in your own way and let me keep it in mine." You got a sense of Scrooge. We know this, don't we? The best Scrooge, all of us, if we watch it at all. You know, we watch a George C. Scott Scrooge. That doesn't do it for me. George C. Scott is always General Patton. Patton will never be Ebenezer Scrooge. The version to watch is 1951, Alastair Sims. That's the version to watch, black and white. The British version. It isn't George Scott pretending to be Ebenezer Scrooge. So Cratchit's watching the clock. It's getting cold. The shadows are creeping across the floor. Scrooge is watching the clock. And Cratchit's watching Scrooge to get up and signal it's the end of the day. See if I got this here for you. At length, the hour of shutting up the counting house arrived. With an ill will, Scrooge dismounted from a stool and tacitly admitted to the fact to the expectant clerk in the cubicle, who instantly snuffed out his candle and put on his hat. "You'll want all day tomorrow, I suppose. If convenient, sir." "It's not convenient, and it's not fair. If I was to stop half a crown for it, you'd think yourself ill-used. And yet," said Scrooge, "you don't think me ill-used when I pay you a day's wage for no work. A poor excuse, Cratchit, a poor excuse for picking a man's pocket every 25th of December," said Scrooge, buttoning his greatcoat to his chin. "But I suppose you must have the whole day. Be here all the earlier in the morning." "Oh, yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you." Scrooge goes off, has his morose meal, makes his way. It's Christmas Eve day, Christmas Eve night. Marley died 7 years ago, Christmas Eve night. And the only mourner was Scrooge. And Scrooge still lived in that flat, dull, desolate, dark apartment that he had shared with Marley. And he takes out that thick key and puts it in the lock and turns the lock, and he thinks he sees, doesn't he? He thinks he sees Marley's face in the door knocker. He shakes it off and goes up the stairs and looking about and walks through his apartment and double locks the doors. And then he scratches together a thin fire, a very thin fire. He's cheap, puts on his nightgown, his hat, and sits as close as he can to the fire with a bowl of gruel, just sipping it. And then the doorbells begin to ring in the corner of the room. Ding-a-ling-a-ling, ding-a-ling-a-ling, ding-a-ling-a-ling. I mean, they're covered with dust, they're covered with cobwebs. They haven't chimed in years. Ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling, ding-a-ling. And then he hears, coming up the stairs, something's coming up the stairs. Right? Thump, thump, thump. It's Marley, isn't it? And right through the locked door comes Marley. Dead as a doornail. 7 years dead, Christmas Eve night. So let's go to that briefly. Here we go. "How now?" said Scrooge, caustic and cold as ever. "What do you want with me?" "Much, much." Marley's voice, no doubt about it. "Who are you?" "Ask me who I was." "Who were you then?" "Your partner." "In life, I was your partner, Jacob Marley. Can you sit down?" "I can." "Do it then." "You don't believe in me, Scrooge." "I don't." "What evidence would you have of my reality beyond that of your own senses?" "I don't know," said Scrooge. "Because a little thing affects them, a slight disorder of the stomach. You may be an undigested bit of beef, a plot of mustard, a crumb of cheese, a fragment of an undone potato. There's more of gravy than of grave about you, whatever you are." "Silence, Scrooge, silence." You are fettered, Marley." "I wear the chain I forged in life. I made it, link by link, yard by yard. I girded it on of my own free will. And of my own free will I wore it. Is its pattern strange to you, Scrooge? Now, Marley is all wrapped up in bandages, and he's got dragging chains, and on those chains are cash boxes and safes and wallets, money. People that never paid me, people that never, even when I sent the law after them, compound interest on the loan. You are fettered, said Scrooge. And then he goes on, Jacob, tell me, speak comfort to me, Jacob. I've none to give, replied Marley. But you were always a good man of business. Business? Mankind was my business. The common welfare was my business. Charity, mercy, forbearance, benevolence were all my businesses. The dealings of my trade, Scrooge, but a drop of water in the comprehensive ocean of my business. Hear me, Scrooge. My time is nearly gone. I will, but don't be hard on me, Jacob. You will be haunted, said Marley, by 3 spirits. I think I'd rather not. Silence, Scrooge. Without these visits, you cannot hope to shun the path I tread. Expect the first tomorrow, when the bell tolls 1. Couldn't I take them all at once and have it over with, Jacob? Silence! Expect the second on the next night of the same hour, the third upon the next night when the last stroke of 12 has ceased. Look to see me no more, Ebenezer. For your own sake, remember what has passed between us. And then Marley levitates, goes to the window, right through the window, a ghost. And Dickens looks out. And he sees all these ghosts wandering. They've got chains, and they're dragging these safes and cash books, and they're all moaning and groaning, and he's looking down. I recognize him. See, Dickens enjoyed fantasy. See, this is the supernatural at work. And Dickens believed, and many of us believe, or some of us believe, that there's a very sheer membrane, a gossamer membrane between the spirit world and the living world. And that depending on the time of year, the Irish are into this, depending on the time of year, changelings, depending on the time of year, that one can slip from the spirit world to the living world, and that you can be visited, you can have extrasensory perception. And there are people that, depending how you're set up, that are alive to that, that you're wired just a little bit differently, and you can sense things. Your head comes up. What just happened here? I heard that. What was that? And people who have that perception, and they're not strange. They just have a higher sense of perception, a keener sense of where we are in the mystery of the spirit world and the real world. And that's what Halloween's all about, isn't it? Halloween. So Scrooge gets into bed, and he's waiting, isn't he? He's in bed. He's got the night curtain around him for the warmth, to keep out that draft. It's always cold there. He's got his nightgown on, his hat. He's there, and his sheet up to his chin. And then he notices, he sees, he feels, and looks. And the room he had just left is now glowing with light. It's brilliant. It's incandescent. And he looks, leaning up in his bed and looking. There's a young child there, a child with a glowing head. Memory. So this is the first intercession. There are 3 intercessions, 3 ghosts. The 3 is so much an important number in the Christian faith. The Trinity, well, the Christmas season, the three kings and visiting, Jesus of Nazareth, 3 hours on the cross, rising from the dead. The three, numerology. Well, it's not numerology. And these three ghosts are intercessions, and they bring gifts. And that young child with that glowing head is memory, to help him remember what it used to be like when you were young, before you grew cold, before you froze up, before you pushed everybody away. And that young child, it's unclear if it's a male or a female, it doesn't matter, it's a child. And the child comes, and you can see him, can't you? Can't you see Scrooge recoiling? Is this? Are you a bit of undone potato? And he puts the spirit puts his hand on Scrooge's heart to begin the very slow process of opening up that calloused heart, that scarred over heart, and out the window they go. And it's Christmas past memory. And Scrooge, it's all bright and colorful and light. Spirit, I know this road. It's the lane where my house was on. Over there's the school. Spirit, I know this home. Spirit. And Scrooge is looking around. Again, it's supernatural. And he sees himself in school, a young lad with his knickers on, laughing and interacting with his childhood friends and making fun of the teacher and so forth. And hey, that's me. I'm smiling. Hey, that's me. That's me. And then he sees Fezziwig, plump Mr. Fezziwig, and even plumper Mrs. Fezziwig. And he's there. That's where he worked. He clerked in that store. It was an all-purpose store. It wasn't a hardware store. All-purpose store, retail store. And Fezziwig has come out and clapped his hands and said, put all the work down, push the tables to the walls, and bring in the food, bring in the punch, bring in the violins, and let's dance and be merry and have our gift-giving. And Scrooge sees himself smiling and laughing and dancing, and wow, he sees himself. And then he sees Belle. 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 Belle, 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 it's Ebenezer, it's Ebenezer. She can't hear you, Scrooge. Now, who was Belle? He'd been engaged to Belle. They were to be married. And so many years later, and as Scrooge is watching, he sees Belle's husband come in with gifts, and she's busy getting ready. It's Christmas Eve day, you see, getting ready for Christmas morning. And Belle, I was coming through London, Belle, and guess who I saw, Belle? Who did you see with him? I saw Ebenezer Scrooge. You saw Ebenezer Scrooge? Indeed. He was at his desk, bent over his books, bent over his books. Did you speak to him? No, I just saw him through the window, very dimly bent over his books. And she pauses. He can hear this. You know, William, we were engaged to be married. I loved him. I loved him dearly. And can we not talk about this, please? It's Christmas Eve day. This is a guy, right? Can we not talk about this? That was then. This is now. Do we have to talk about this? He changed, William. He changed. Money, money, money. He became all about money. And Scrooge, Spirit, please, no, take me home, no, no, no. Back in bed. Now what's up? I got another one coming? Can't you see his eyes going back and forth? And in that room opens up again. And there's an enormous spirit there. There's an enormous giant there with thick leather boots, rich leather boots, nicely polished, very supple leather. He's wearing a crown, and he has Christmas around him. He looks like a huge Christmas tree. It's all a green garland and a cornucopia of food and gifts. He's sitting on a throne. This is the spirit of Christmas present. This is what's going on today. And he walks to the bed, and up they go. Out they go. And what does Scrooge see? He sees people, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, Merry Christmas, carrying trees, carrying gifts, shoveling snow, the children ice skating, the children throwing snowballs at each other. It's present. It's Christmas Day. And yet it's Christmas Day, and he's in Christmas Eve night. So it's, again, it's the spirit world. And he sees a group of young boys skating on a pond. And there's one lad who's sitting on the bank of the pond with his leg curled under him with a crutch. And he sees Bob Cratchit coming down the street. Bob Cratchit, Bob Cratchit. And Tim, father, father, father. Spirit, I didn't know Cratchit had children. Father, father, I didn't know Cratchit had a child who was partially disabled with a crutch. I didn't know that, Spirit. Now this is Dickens. One of his brothers was disabled. They call him Tiny Fred. So you see the transfer here. And Cratchit picks up Tim, puts him on his shoulders, and off they go. You know, walking on the ice with the children. And Cratchit, Bob Cratchit, his children. I never knew he was married. I never thought to ask. I never thought to bother. And then they're in the Cratchit home. And it's Christmas Day and it's dinner. And Scrooge is with this enormous giant. At last the dinner was all done. The cloth was cleared, the hearth swept, and the fire made up. Merry Christmas, this is Cratchit. Merry Christmas to us all, my dear. God bless us, which the family re-echoed. Tiny Tim, this is Dickens for us, Tiny Tim sat very close to his father's side upon his little stool. Bob held his withered little hand in his, as if he loved the child and wished to keep him by his side, and dreaded that he might be taken from him. Spirit, Spirit, said Scrooge, tell me if Tiny Tim will live. I see a vacant seat, said the ghost, in the poor chimney corner, and a crutch without an owner, carefully preserved. If these shadows remain unaltered by the future, the child will die. No, oh no, kind spirit, say he will be spared. This is the first crack, you know, and a little tear glistens. Say the child will be spared. If these shadows remain, Scrooge, unaltered by the future, none other of my race will find him here. What then? If he be like to die, he had better do it and decrease the surplus population. Scrooge hung his head to hear his own words quoted by the Spirit, and he was overcome with penitence and grief. Cratchit's at the table. Damn, I just lost my place. Mr. Scrooge, said Cratchit. Mr. Scrooge, I give you Mr. Scrooge, the founder of our feast. The founder of our feast, indeed, cried Mrs. Cratchit, reddening. I wish I had him here. I'd give him a piece of my mind to feast upon, and I hope he'd have a good appetite for it. My dear, the children, it's Christmas Day. It should be Christmas Day, I'm sure, on which one drinks the health of such an odious, stingy, hard, unfeeling man as Mr. Scrooge. You know he is, Robert. Nobody knows it better than you, poor fellow. My dear, it's Christmas Day. I'll drink to his health for your sake and the day, said Mrs. Cratchit, but not for his. Scrooge sees this. He hears this. I mean, this is present tense. He's back in bed. Now what's coming? He's back in bed. It's dark and cold. Now what? And out of that darkened room, no light, no voice, no face, comes the spirit of Christmas yet to be. What to expect? This is what you can expect unless you change your behaviors. And it's a tall, thin skeleton of a ghost with a long cloak on, a hood, and No face, no eyes, no teeth, no voice, just coming to Scrooge. And he's cowering. And that long, bony arm comes out of that sleeve, and at the end of that long, bony arm is a long, bony finger pointing to Scrooge in the window. And out they go. This is what you can expect unless you mend your ways. And what does Scrooge see? What does he hear? He sees these young boys who work for Fagin as pickpockets, thieves. And they've broken into Scrooge's apartment because Fagin is shrewd enough, evil enough, to read the obituaries. And Scrooge is dead. The apartment is vacant. Let's break in, boys. And what can we find and sell to the, to sell on the streets to the vendors? And Scrooge is looking at this. That's my shaving brush. That's the curtain around my bed. That's my comb. Spirit, am I dead? Am I dead? Spirit says nothing. And then he hears a woman saying, I'm glad he's dead. I'm glad Scrooge is dead. It was all about interest rates and overdue accounts. I'm glad he's dead. Spirit, Spirit. And then he finds himself on the corner where his office is. And he looks in the window. He's not there. There's someone else sitting in his office. The furniture is different. It's all rearranged. Spirit, Spirit, am I dead? Spirit. Then they're in the graveyard. And this is a graveyard. This is an Edgar Allan Poe graveyard. Dark, hilly, damp. The trees broken and gnarled, branches twisted and turning. Something right out of Halloween. Headstones tipped down. This graveyard has not been tended to in decades. The spirits stood among the graves and pointed down to one. He advanced, Scrooge advanced toward it trembling. Before I draw nearer to the stone to which you point, answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be? Or are they the shadows of things that may be only? Ghost said nothing. Pointed to the stone, pointed to Scrooge, pointed from Scrooge to the stone. Scrooge crept toward it, trembling as he went, and following the finger read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. Am I that man who lay upon the bed? He cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him to the grave. Oh, no, Spirit, please, please, no Spirit, no Spirit, good Spirit, good Spirit. Oh, hear me, I am not the man I was. I will honor Christmas in my heart and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Spirit, please. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me that I may sponge away the writing on this stone. And he kneels in front of the Spirit. This is death. This is the Grim Reaper. And as he's on his knees and pleading, suddenly the shroud disappears. It goes into the ground, and he wakes up. And the shroud it reappears as the four bedposts, and the curtain is around it. And you know, sometimes when you have a bad dream, am I okay? Did I just get run over by an 18-wheeler? Am I all right? Am I all right? And Scrooge and Dickens brings us to the bedroom. Yes, yes. And the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own. The room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the times before him was his own to make amends. Oh, Jacob Marley, heaven and the Christmas time, be praised for this, I say it on my knees. Oh, Jacob, on my knees. I don't know what to do. And then he said, what's today? What's today? And he hears the church bells pealing and ringing. You know, boom, boom, boom. It's Christmas Day. It's Christmas Day. And he gets up and throws open the window and there's a young lad walking along. He says, young lad, young buck, he calls him Buck. Young buck, what day is it? Oh, so what day is it, sir? It's Christmas Day. And Scrooge, stay right there. Don't go a further step. Stay right, I'll be right down. It's Christmas Day. I haven't missed it. The spirits have done it all in one night. They can do anything they like. Of course they can. Of course they can. Hello, my fine fellow. Hello, returned the boy. Do you know where the store is where they sell the goose, the meat market? Oh, I sure hope I did, replied the lad. An intelligent boy, said Scrooge. A remarkable boy. Do you know whether they sold the prize turkey that was hanging up there? Not the little prize turkey, the big one. What? The big one? As big as me? Oh, what a fine young man. Oh, what a delightful boy. Stay right there. So Scrooge runs downstairs, gives the kid some money, says, buy the turkey. Sometimes it's translated the goose. And bring it to the Cratchits, post-haste. And keep the change. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you. Merry Christmas. And Merry Christmas to you. And Scrooge goes back up to the window, and these people are walking to service. And Merry Christmas, Scrooge. This is Scrooge. And then he ends, you see, the redemption. 5 chapters, 5 staves. This is redemption to be read aloud. Stave 1 begins with Marley, the epilogue, the opening rather. And stave 5, the epilogue, Scrooge is back in the office. He wants to be there before Bob Cratchit shows up. And Cratchit comes in. Cratchit comes in late. Let's describe this. This is the close, and then you're free to go. Your homework is to read this. Everybody. You know, libraries have Whitman reads. Whitman reads. But he was early at the office next morning, Scrooge was. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming late. That was the thing he had his heart set upon. And he did it. Yes, the clock struck 9, oh Bob. 1:15, no Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see Cratchit come into the office. And Cratchit snuck in, trying to be very quiet, as we all are. Hello! What do you mean by coming here at this time of day, Cratchit? Oh, I'm very sorry, sir. I am behind my time. I'm late. You are. Yes, I think you are, Cratchit. Step this way, sir, if you please. Bob trembled. And he walked in. A Merry Christmas, Bob, said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken, as he slapped him on the back. A Merry Christmas, Bob, my good fellow, that I've given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavor to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon over a Christmas bowl of smoking punch. Bob, make up the fires, and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit. Scrooge was better than his word. He did it all, and infinitely more, and to Tiny Tim, who did not die, he was a second father. He became as good a friend, as good a master, as good a man as a good old city knew. Some people laughed to see the alteration in him, but he let them, he let them laugh, and little heeded them, for he's wise enough to know that nothing ever happened on this globe for the good, at which some people did not have their fill of laughter. He had no further visits from the spirits, and it was always said of Scrooge that he knew how to keep Christmas. May that be truly said of us. And so, as Tiny Tim observed, God bless us, everyone. So there we have it. There we have it. Scrooge, bah humbug, Merry Christmas, Tiny Tim, the man himself, dead as a doornail, and Tiny Tim having the last word. So at the very end, it's Tim, Scrooge, Cratchit, and At the very end also, those alms collectors who would come about on Christmas Eve day looking for contributions, Scrooge had been stingy, but they come back again. And he says, tell me what you want. I'll write you a check. What do you need for the day? Mr. Scrooge, I will sign a check. Tell me what you would like me to donate. You see, this is what is necessary. Before, and I'll close with this. Before the giant disappears and leads to the phantom, the Grim Reaper, the giant opens up his jacket. No, it's not his jacket, it's his shroud, it's his cloak. And between his knees are two starving, emaciated, shivering children with the bones, their bones sticking out. And one's a boy and one's a little girl. And it's want and ignorance. This is what we need to deal with. And then he brings them back under the shelter. And he's gone. And Scrooge is in his room. And in comes the spirit of Christmas past, the Grim Reaper. Oh, let me sponge that name off. So I want to share it with you folks. Thank you for sharing with me, and for the good people of Milton. Merry Christmas, not Milton. The good people of Whitman. I'm rhyming that. So Merry Christmas, Happy Hanukkah, or Bah Humbug.